something I saw in the news a few days ago. The oldest prehistoric art unearthed. This is from the BBC News Service. Well, they were digging around in Africa like they always do, happens to be South Africa, and they unearthed this artifact. So the article says scientists say the discovery shows that the modern ways of thinking developed far earlier than we think. This engraving itself is quite complex geometric pattern. There is a system to the patterns. Now, when we look at it, because we're uninformed people, it just looked like somebody scratched on a rock. Right? Well, if you go to Japan and write in English with somebody that's living off away from urban Japan that only speaks their native language, and when you write in your language, it looks like scratch on a paper because they don't understand it. They say, we don't know what they mean, but they are symbols that we think could have been interpreted by those people as having meaning that would have been understood by others. The engraved pieces were removed from Middle Stone Age layers at Blombos Cave, east of Cape Town, and are at least 70,000 years old. Dr. Henshaw Wood says more than 8,000 other pieces were found in the cave, many of which have been rubbed smooth as if to make pigment powder. The find pushes back by some 35,000 years, the earliest time when biological modern humans were known to have developed modern behavior. The theory up till now has been that modern human behavior started around 40,000 years ago. The whole of South Africa was occupied by biologically modern people who had evolved about 150,000 years ago. There is no doubt that the people in Southern Africa were behaviorally modern at least 70,000 years ago. Isn't that something?
Yes, sir.
Black history, purpose, and Jesus Christ. Now, when you are under the teaching of somebody who is formally, classically trained theologically in the standard theological seminary, as a student of seminary, there is no discussion of extra biblical evidence of how man has lived and had flourishing, advanced, modern civilizations beyond the timeline of biblical history. Because the Bible only records from 5,000 to 6,000 years of man's history. But this shows you that black people have been on this planet a very long time. So how can you justify enslaving an ancient people? You have to come up with a theology. See, what you don't realize, what we may not understand, is that above science, above economics, above finance, above medicine, above art, above everything, the thing that governs the mind of man has always been religion and spirituality. And based upon what religion you are given, what spiritual understanding you are nurtured in, it puts up a construct of how you see yourself and how you perceive reality and the limitations that you have in that reality. But it was under the new Hermetic hypothesis, everyone in the so-called New World was taught to see black people as born to be hewers of wood and drawers of water, burden bearers for the European nations. It was under the new Hermetic hypothesis that the kidnap, enslavement, murder, rape, torture, the psychological genocide and sadistic retention of black people was justified by the leaders of Europe and American theology and religion. Jewish and Christian leaders crafted a theology to justify captivity in the West, while white Arabs were doing it in the East. We are the byproduct of Jews and Christians and Europeans who enslaved us and went west to the New World, the so-called New World. But there are others of our ancestors who are the victims of a similar slavery, a physical slavery that took place in the East. But the slavery in the East never robbed them of their language or their culture or their mind. It never stripped them psychologically. But it did make them worship the white Arab. In any case, we've all been made to believe that God sees us as inferior. And this produced perpetual self-hatred. Here we are in 2013. We want blonde hair. We want blue eyes. We want lighter skin. Skin bleaching cream is still a hot product, especially in Africa now. We want our hair straight. We don't want it too kinky or too curly. All of our celebrities and our entertainers, they want to reconstruct their natural features to narrow them to fit in with Madison Avenue or Hollywood. We've been made to believe not only does society see us inferior, a lot of us really believe that God has ordained inferiority for us. That the suffering we go through is God's curse. Y'all all right? Yes, sir. Here's another slide. 35 ancient pyramids discovered in Sudan. The more they dig in the earth, the more they find that black people have had civilizations that go so far back, you will never find the beginning of the black man's civilization. But they don't want your children to know this. Black purpose in America. This is what the new Hamitic hypothesis produced. Black people who saw themselves, even though it was a bitter life, we began to see ourselves as a people who God had ordained for us to be only the burden bearers. And somehow, over time, as God has tried to call us out, Satan has amplified his ability to affect our mind. And so our children today are less inculcated with a sense of ethnic or racial or historical pride. They have almost no appetite for their heritage today. But if you could talk to your ancestors who got a chance to break out of slavery in the 1800s, the number one thing they wanted to do was to marry and make family and create their own traditions, and they had a sense of their own blackness and a pride in who they were. Right. Yes, sir. Teach, man. And that's how you look on documentaries and you see thousands of black people marching down the street with suits and straw hats and daub hats and dress shoes and ties on. They're going to a protest. They're being bit by dogs. They're being sprayed with water hose. They're being beat by billy clubs. They know they're going out there for a battle, but they went out dignified. That's right. Yes, sir. They had a sense of self-esteem. But today, black people's self-esteem is totally obliterated. What about yours? And just because I call myself a Muslim, just because I read Message to the Black Man, just because I go to Sunday school and I learn the books of the Bible and something about the characters in the Bible, it doesn't mean that I don't have low self-esteem. Just because I sing in the choir or just because I preach the word, it does not mean that I don't have self-esteem. Low self-esteem, pardon me. Black people are plagued with all of the top characteristics of low self-esteem. Excessive fear and anxiety. Social withdrawal. Eating disorders, meaning with black people, it's not anorexia and bulimia. We just overeat. We are a fat, obese people who love to eat to medicate ourselves because we retreat from the burdens of a stressful society that plagues us with bias and prejudice, and we use food as comfort. We're full of insecurities and fears. We know how to exaggerate the negative about one another. Can't nobody talk about black folks like another black person. I mean, I watched how they did that sister Beyonce. No matter what she did, they was on her. And you listen to people's remarks about some people who I may not agree with where they are spiritually or consciously, but I can see that they put in work to make something out of themselves in life, and they're having an impact on the world. But black people will tear them down over the smallest little thing. So in a certain part of the community, everybody is looking at Kanye and Jay-Z and some of the more successful rappers. They must be a part of the Illuminati. How could you be successful as a black man unless you're a part of the Illuminati? This is ignorance. As a young high school student, I was the research assistant to a man named Steve Coakley, who is the grand godfather of conspiracy theory in black America. And I can tell you without hesitation that Steve Coakley would spank the behinds of some of these idiots that I see on YouTube and other places trying to twist and contort the lives of every successful black person to include them in the Illuminati. The Illuminati don't need Negroes to do what they're doing. They're not going to give us no membership card to a society that has governed European and American society for thousands of years. Do you think they need us carrying a membership card to promote their agenda? This is the way of people who are quick to criticize their own and exaggerate the negative. We put a lot of emphasis on what other people think of us, talking about low self-esteem. We treat ourselves badly. You know you shouldn't be smoking. You know you shouldn't be drinking. Just your nature tell you. If you never read a book about it, an article about it at all, your nature tell you after a while, this stuff got me coughing, it got me feeling funny after the high come down or whatever. You know you killing yourself. You done ate 6 boxes of cookies, and now your stomach is just talking back to you and slapping you around in the middle of the night. You can't go to sleep. The cookies was good when you ate them, but you realize in the middle of the night you are doing wrong and harm to yourself. You treating yourself badly. A person with low self-esteem does not treat themselves fairly. Not at all. So when we get around whites, we almost expect to receive less than other whites. So if you raise hell on your job, most of the other black people will say, girl, you better be quiet. They might fire you. Right. You better. Oh, they gave you a 50-cent raise. I know they gave John $2 raise, but man, you better calm down. Because we're not used to treating ourselves with justice. Right. We have negative expectations for everything we do. Whenever we go somewhere, especially if it's not a party. If you think about going to school, you're thinking about going anywhere that's kind of serious, we have a negative expectation. And the negative expectation oftentimes is rooted in the fact that we treat ourselves badly. So since I have low self-esteem and a poor thought about myself as a black person, when I have to handle you, I mishandle you, but it's rooted in something that's wrong with me. So I give you a bad experience. We're reluctant to face challenges. We have apprehension of the future. We lack confidence in our decisions. We have high self-dissatisfaction. We always see the grass as greener on the other side. We're unable to accept our natural, normal imperfections and shortcomings. We go out of our way to impress everybody. We have a high level of self-pity. And we always blame others for what's happening to us, and we retain a high victimology attitude. And last one I want to mention is when you have low self-esteem, you always break your word. That is the trait of a person whose mind has been broken and their self-esteem, their self-worth is low. So if they tell you they will call you, don't expect it. If they tell you they're with you, don't believe it. Because a person with low self-esteem is apprehensive. They look for the negative. They make excuses. They have pity for themselves, and they're always looking for a way to avoid more stress, because low self-esteem does not show you how to cope with the stress of facing challenges that are required to make something out of your life. Y'all all right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Just a few more minutes. Now, we were made slaves. Is that right? Now, do you know who was the last slave in your family? If you don't know who the last slave was in your family, then you're not honoring your ancestors.
That's heavy.
Why would we be here with the benefit of what they went through and not even know how they look or their name or something about who was the last person in my family that reaped down them fields for the slave master?
That's heavy.
Even though we were slaves, we are a holy people. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And slavery is a contradiction to the character of God. And God must, if he is God, answer if he expects black people in America to acknowledge him and serve him. Then God himself must explain to us how he allowed us to endure chattel slavery and still be called God. So as the great AME Bishop Daniel A. Payne pleaded in 1852, let me show you this brother. Black man, Bishop Daniel A. Payne pleaded. And he says, sometimes it seems as though some wild beast has plunged his fangs into my heart and was squeezing out its lifeblood. Then I began to question the existence of God and say, if he does exist, is he just? If so, why does he suffer one race to oppress and enslave another, to rob them by unrighteous enactments of rights which they hold most dear and sacred? Sometimes I wished for the lawmakers what Nero wished, that the Romans had but one neck. I would be the man to sever the head from its shoulders. And again said I, is there no God? How can there be a God and allow over 1 million black people to be in prison in America? How can there be a God and we don't know our names or our languages? We know nothing of ourselves and our history. We still see ourselves as master's nigger. But it was under this new Hamitic hypothesis that the mind of whites and the blacks under those whites were formed. But that new Hermetic hypothesis was a mistake because it led from a theological stance to the abolition of slavery. But before the abolition of slavery, there was a battle, a theological battle going on in America. And like Southerners, white Northern churchmen did not regard blacks as equals, and therefore regulated the affairs of church life in the interest of white superiority. So yes, slavery was dominantly in the South, but even here in states like Illinois, white people saw themselves as justified in being inferior over us, but it was based upon a theological teaching that allowed them to believe that God was white and he was the God of white people. Therefore, dark people had to be inferior to the white man. That was in the North and the South. And just as biblical interpretation and theology has been tainted, altered, and even falsified and mislabeled a whole group of people as non-existence, so has the true history, revelation, teachings, and identity of Jesus the Christ been done the same. We go to church and we learn of Jesus, but what we learn has very little backing in history about who Jesus was, what Jesus did, and what Jesus' message was. Y'all all right? Yes, I'm almost done. Stay with me. Because we're going out into the world as Torchlight Ministry. We're not trying to run off our Christian family. We want to embrace our Christian family, but we got to embrace in the spirit of Christ, and in the spirit of Christ is the truth. Jesus was a man of truth. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So he would not stand for me to lie on him or you. He would not stand for me to falsify his identity, nor to falsify any other man or woman's identity. Jesus was a man of God and a man of truth. And so we have to deal with the truth of what has happened to our religion. For modern Christians, it is normal to acknowledge Buddha or Zoroaster or Prophet Muhammad as historical individuals. Just like Julius Caesar or Hannibal or Alexander the Great, Christians will acknowledge all of these. They acknowledge Prophet Muhammad, but he was a historical fellow who did some good stuff in history, but going so far as to see him as a man of God, that's a problem. Or if you're dealing with Muslims, to go so far as to see Zoroaster as a man of God, or Jesus even as a man like Muhammad, there's a problem.
Right.
Modern Christians, however, distinguish these historical figures from any theology or spiritual religious understanding. They distinguish them as legends, historical legends, but they do not see them and relate to their own religious traditions that have sprung up from these men. But as far as Jesus is concerned, such differentiation is never made. Yet if looked at separately, the historical facts available versus the religious traditions that may have become associated with them, the religious traditions have become indistinguishable. And the separation between the religious tradition and the historical fact have become a threat to our Christian understanding. Therefore, for the average Christian, it is easier to blur the lines between history and religious tradition. Thus, we have learned to fuse two distinct figures into one person. On the one hand, there is the Jesus of history, the man who, according to most scholars, actually existed and walked in Palestine 2,000 years ago. And on the other hand, there is the man God of church doctrine, the divine person, deified, praised, and celebrated by the followers of Paul. To regard these two distinct figures as one is considered by most modern Christians as blasphemy. Maybe you don't understand. See, religion is what I believe. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And what I believe does not have to have any truth to it. There don't have to be no fact involved in it at all. Do you teach your children that the stork brings babies? Well, that's kind of a religion. It's a belief, but ain't no truth to it. Even though millions of people believe it and teach it, it's a religion, it's a mythology, if you will. But it's not the truth. Have you ever put a dollar or a dime or a quarter under the pillow of your child when they lost a tooth? And told them that the tooth fairy put it there? Well, that's kind of a religion. It's a belief system, but, pardon me, family, it's not true. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
The whole world celebrates Christmas. That Santa Claus is coming down the chimney in one night to everybody. It's a belief system, but it is not true. So religion is a belief, but it does not mean that it is rooted in facts and truth. So when you talk about Jesus, you're talking about two figures that have been made into one man in our modern understanding. There is the historical Jesus and there is the religious Jesus, who stories and whatnot have been crafted to lift him up as the creator of the heavens and the earth, and that is different from the facts and evidence of what Jesus actually taught. Are you with me?
Yes, sir.
So who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? See, when they started talking about freeing our ancestors from slavery, the first thing they did was give us religion.
Right.
And the number one personality we had to know of is Jesus. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So what reason, when you have used and abused and milked a people for free labor for 310 years, and now your society is waxing powerful and wealthy and great, and now it's become politically unsuitable for you to keep them in that condition, and you have to give them some freedoms. Why now, out of all that you could have given them, you didn't make them worship the King of England? You didn't make them worship the Queen of Australia. You didn't make them bow down to some other great person. You didn't tell them that the Pope was their God. You gave our ancestors Jesus, but you gave him in a very cunning, crafty way that it would augment your teaching in their mind. So even though you gave them freedom, there was a programming in their mind that would prevent them from exercising the full power of that freedom. I hope you understand. Who is Jesus? Who was he? Who is Christ? Who is that? And is that the man we think he is? J.A. Rogers, the great black historian, in the book Nature, quotes the French anthropologist Topinard. In the first century, when Christianity was beginning to seat itself in Rome, the doctrine of a separate creation for whites and blacks was defended by the Babylonian rabbis and later by the Emperor Julian. The infamous mythological dogma that black skin is a consequence of Noah's curse on his son Ham was introduced about the same time. And not long after the first blacks were taken from West Africa by Europeans, Pope Julius II commissioned the painting of certain biblical works from the artist Michelangelo, and in doing so initiated the image of God, the angels, and the prophets as white. Who is that? Subconsciously, when you see that image, subconsciously you think that's Jesus of your Bible. But that's not Jesus. Do you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Look at it. This man is not in no way, shape, or form Jesus, or Jesus' first cousin, his second cousin, his uncle, his brother. This man has no historical, biological, genetic, ethnic connection to the real man, Jesus of 2,000 years ago. That is not Jesus. That is a replica of a man who was a model, a painting model for the artist Michelangelo, who some scholars say, according to reports, that when he was trying to come up with an image, a white image of Jesus, he looked over in the corner at his drunk uncle who was sleeping in the corner, and he used his face as the image of the white man who would masquerade as Jesus. The Jesus of history was a black man. Do you hear me?
Yes, sir.
The Christ of biblical prophecy is a black man. And so Christ says in the Bible, in the book of Revelations, over and over again, I am the Alpha and the Omega. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
If you've ever read it. I am the beginning and I am the end. So when you think back on the picture I showed you, and the scholars saying that black people had a modern civilization at least 150,000 years ago, deep down at the bottom of the continent of Africa, you're talking about a people who are the Alpha and the Omega. Europeans cannot make that claim because we can find historically where they started. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So I ask you, is the church and our Christianity formed out of the mind of Jesus? And if it is, then what would Jesus have to say about the effect of the church on society and even further the minds of black people? If the church, if our Christianity is rooted in the true Jesus, then it would empower us to have a different effect on society. We are not a part in many ways of the true church of Christ. The true church of Christ is supposed to tell the world about Christ's warfare with evil, with alien and hostile forces. The church is supposed to be men and women running through the streets announcing that freedom is a reality. God in Christ has set men free from Satan's power. This means an end to a slave mentality and all that implies. The church tells black people to shape up and act like free men because the old powers of white supremacy are being destroyed. The call of God constitutes the church, and it is a call to suffering. We must suffer. We must bear the cross in a world where